The storm screamed over the jagged cliffs, tearing at the edges of the helicopter as if nature itself wanted to swallow the small aircraft whole. Rain lashed violently against the windshield, a torrent of silver slicing across the cockpit, turning visibility into near zero. Inside, the tension was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. The Navy SEALs huddled tightly, their battle-hardened eyes wide with panic as the rotors shuddered violently against the wind. "We're going to die," one shouted, his voice raw, a mixture of fear and disbelief. Every man in that chopper had stared death in the face countless times during covert missions, but nothing, had prepared them for this. Amid the chaos, a figure that seemed utterly out of place rose from her seat. She was a rookie nurse, barely 23, her uniform plastered to her skin by the storm, her short brown hair damp and plastered to her face. Her name was Emily Parker, and until this moment, she had never flown a helicopter. She had spent months in the field with the SEALs, administering first aid in the middle of firefights, patching bullet wounds, and stabilizing broken bones under enemy fire. But nothing had ever prepared her for taking the controls of a dying aircraft in a storm that felt hell-bent on swallowing them whole. Emily's hands trembled as she gripped the controls, the rotors screaming louder with every gust of wind. Around her, seasoned warriors, the epitome of courage and calm under fire, were trembling in raw fear. She could hear their panicked breaths, the rattling of equipment, the prayer-like murmurs of men who had seen the darkest corners of the world and still never imagined they would face their mortality in such a way. For a fleeting moment, doubt gripped her chest. She wasn't trained to pilot a helicopter, she was trained to save lives once they reached the ground. But as her eyes swept across the faces of the SEALs, she realized that this was not the time for fear. This was the moment to become something she had never imagined, a lifeline. If you believe in kindness, courage, and second chances, take a moment now to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Emily took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing her fingers to steady. She remembered her first day in the field, the uncertainty in her own steps, the way the SEALs had looked at her like she might be more of a liability than an asset. She remembered wanting to prove herself, to be more than just a nurse, someone they could rely on, someone who could make a difference even in the midst of chaos. And now, this was her chance. If she failed, they would all die. If she succeeded, she could save every life on board. The helicopter lurched violently, pitching sharply as if trying to throw them all into the jagged cliffs below. Emily fought against the violent sway, her fingers clenching the controls with every ounce of determination she had. She listened to the SEALs barking commands, guiding her, some through clenched teeth, others through raw panic. It was like trying to solve a puzzle while the ground beneath you was moving, shaking, and trying to tear you apart. Each decision had to be precise, every move calculated. One wrong twist, one slight error, and they would plummet to their deaths. Her mind flashed to the lives she had seen extinguished because help hadn't arrived in time. The young soldier she had tried to save, the child in the conflict zone whose small hand she had held as the world turned upside down, she couldn't let their deaths be in vain. That thought alone steadied her hands. That thought alone gave her courage she didn't know she had. Minutes stretched like hours. The storm was relentless, the wind tearing at the helicopter like a beast desperate for its prey. The SEALs were shouting, yelling instructions, correcting, guiding. Emily listened, she absorbed, she reacted. Slowly, agonizingly, inch by inch, she learned the rhythm of the machine. She began to feel the helicopter, almost as if it had become an extension of herself. The chaos didn't disappear, but she stopped being terrified by it. Instead, she became part of the fight against it. She remembered the first time she had stepped onto the battlefield with the SEALs, the way she had felt out of place, like a fragile thing in the midst of monsters. And now, she was leading them. Not with a weapon, not with strategy, not with brute force, but with courage and presence. She was saving lives with hands that once trembled at the thought of flying a helicopter in a storm. The helicopter hit a sudden downdraft, throwing it toward the cliffside. The SEALs screamed as the rotors groaned, metal bending under pressure. Emily's fingers flew across the controls, a blur of motion, and she pushed against the panic threatening to drown her. She visualized the landing, the flat space that was barely visible through the storm, and she moved with precision, guiding the helicopter away from death's grip. 1 second at a time, one careful adjustment at a time, she carved a path through the storm. The rain pelted her face, the wind ripped at her hair, and for a moment, the world seemed to tilt upside down. She thought of her parents, her little sister, the quiet nights she had spent dreaming of making a difference. She thought of every patient she had ever treated, every life she had saved and failed to save. She thought of every man on this helicopter, their families waiting, their futures dangling by a thread. And then she realized, she was not just a nurse. She was their only chance. Hours, or maybe only minutes, passed in a haze of fear and determination. Every gust of wind was a test, every shift of the rotor a challenge. The SEALs gradually began to sense the change. Their panic softened into concentration, their shouts became calm guidance, their fear transformed into trust. They saw her determination, her focus, her unwillingness to let them die. Slowly, they realized she wasn't just keeping them alive, she was saving them. The helicopter dipped dangerously close to a cliff edge, a sharp ridge scraping the side with a scream of metal. Emily froze for a heartbeat, heart in her throat. She felt the aircraft vibrate beneath her hands, a living thing teetering between life and death. She took a deep, steadying breath, recalled every lesson she had absorbed, every moment she had trained, and made a single, decisive adjustment. The rotors screamed in response, the helicopter lifted slightly, and the worst of the storm seemed to pause in recognition of her resolve. They were still in danger. The storm was far from over. But for the first time since they had taken off, there was a flicker of hope. Emily could feel it in the way the SEALs no longer shouted in panic, the way their hands relaxed just enough to grip their weapons and equipment. They were still alive. And she was keeping them alive. Hours, or what felt like hours, of battling wind, rain, and the constant threat of a cliffside collision finally began to pay off. Emily spotted a small clearing, barely visible through the storm, but enough to attempt a landing. She steadied the helicopter, coaxing it downward with delicate adjustments, her hands working as if guided by some inner instinct. The rotors groaned and groaned, threatening to give out, but she refused to let fear take hold. Inch by inch, they descended. When the skids finally touched the wet ground, the helicopter shuddered violently, almost as if it didn't want to stay alive. Emily held the controls until the final vibrations passed, until the machine settled into a fragile calm. The SEALs stared at her, disbelief etched into their mud-streaked, rain-soaked faces. She could see their awe, their gratitude, their shock. None of them had ever imagined that a rookie nurse could do what she had just accomplished. She lowered the controls and let her arms slump, exhausted but victorious. The silence in the helicopter was deafening. The storm still raged around them, but within the fragile metal shell of the aircraft, life had been carved from the jaws of death. Emily's chest rose and fell with deep, shuddering breaths. She looked around at the men who had doubted her, who had feared the worst, and she felt an overwhelming surge of pride. Not just for herself, but for what courage and determination could achieve. Even in the darkest, most hopeless moments, it was possible to fight back. Outside, the storm began to ease, as if acknowledging her victory. Rain still fell, but it was gentler now, a rhythm rather than a torrent. The wind had lost some of its bite. The SEALs began to unbuckle, stepping out of the helicopter with careful, deliberate movements. Their eyes met hers, and in that shared gaze, no words were needed. Respect, awe, gratitude, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the life she had saved, all were conveyed in a simple look. Emily's hands were still trembling, but now it was not fear, it was relief. Relief that she had done the impossible. Relief that she had been trusted, that she had trusted herself. Relief that she had found courage in the moments that demanded it most. And as she finally stepped out of the helicopter, mud-soaked, drenched, and utterly spent, she realized something profound. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was moving forward even when fear threatened to consume you. Near the end of this story, if it touched your heart, if you feel the weight of courage and hope, please engage with this video, like, comment, and share. Let the world know that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they rise to the moment. Emily Parker had entered that storm as a rookie nurse, uncertain, inexperienced, unsure of her place in a world designed for warriors. She had left it as something far greater, a hero in the truest sense, not because she wielded a weapon, but because she wielded hope. And that hope had saved lives. Before you go, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Did this story inspire you? Did it remind you of a time when courage came from the most unexpected places? We would love to hear from you. As the SEALs gathered their gear and prepared to move out, Emily stood silently, watching the storm clouds break just enough for the first hints of sunlight to shine through. She thought of the families waiting, of the lives she had saved, of the fear that had once gripped her chest and the strength that had replaced it. She knew the memory of this day would never leave her, not the fear, not the adrenaline, not the sheer weight of responsibility. And she knew she had discovered something within herself that could never be taken away, the power to rise, to act, to save. And in that moment, Emily Parker understood something every person should know. Sometimes, it is not the soldiers, not the leaders, not the trained veterans who change the course of fate. Sometimes, it is the quiet, determined hearts, the hands willing to act in desperation, the souls brave enough to reach beyond fear, who carve hope from the edge of oblivion. This story is complete, cinematic, and emotional, designed to run around 1,800 words in YouTube narration style, with built-in engagement prompts and a strong emotional arc. If you want, I can also create 5 ultra-detailed cinematic image prompts for this story so that your YouTube video has accompanying visuals that feel completely real and suspenseful. This would make it incredibly engaging. Do you want me to do that next?